understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is time for the podcast, and this is a special one because we're going to be talking, John, about a new notion which is called employee ownership trusts. Now, what this is, John, it imagines a future where workers become shareholders in their own businesses. And it imagines a future where the key to unlocking, let's say, innovation and productivity and resilience wasn't just technology or management, but the very fact that workers own the gig themselves, and therefore they use more of their own noggin to get things done. It's a really, really interesting idea.
Yeah, look, it sounds brilliant. It's really interesting. It's like a really novel approach.
Yeah, and it's taking, I wouldn't say things by storm, but it's gradually becoming on the radar screen, right? Now, leading the change in Ireland is a company called Wolfgang Digital, which is the first company to make the leap. And we're going to be speaking just now, John, to Alan Coleman, the CEO of Wolfgang Digital, to explore how employee ownerships can transform companies, can empower workers, can get people to work smarter, not longer, and can even change capitalism itself. So let's get right into it. Now, in the later part of the 19th century, a chap called Karl Marx talked about workers, the proletariat, ascending the heights, and what he said was the proletariat must own the commanding heights of the economy. And the Marx view was that workers would take over companies and democratize capitalism in effect. It was kind of Marxism, but with a little bit of revolutionary whiff of it. Now there is a very new, and I happen to think a very interesting incipient movement, which is basically Marxism without Marx. And by that I mean it is called the Employee Ownership Trust. It is a way of owning companies where workers actually share in the ownership of the companies they actually work in, and in that way become much more active members of the workforce, of the company, etc. It's a fantastically interesting idea. It is, I think, going to be one of the big ideas of the 21st century. And we have a champion of it on the line, Alan Coleman of Wolfgang Digital. And Alan is already, in his own company, has put together employee ownership trusts. I'm going to ask Alan to explain what it is, and then we're going to put this in the context of the end of the corporation, possibly. Alan, how are you doing? Good to see you.
I'm good, David. Hi, David. Hi, John. How are you doing?
Now, tell me about employee ownership trusts. What are they and how does it work?
So once I heard about employee ownership trusts, I fell in love with the idea, David. I felt that this is a brilliant succession option for every business owner. Every business owner inevitably needs a succession solution, and this looks like the strongest option to me. So what are they? It's very simple. In an employee ownership trust-run company, employees have a say in how the work is done, and they have a share in profits from work well done. And it's run in the spirit of democracy. So in the objectives of the company is to be run in the long-term best interests of the employees, and the vision and values of the founder are enshrined in the constitution as well.
Now, if we go big before we go small, one of the big issues that has animated many, many people over the last while is this sense that those at the very, very top are basically running companies for themselves. They are taking massive dividends, they are taking massive paychecks, and the workers are simply being priced out of the market. And you see that in the housing market, you see that everywhere, where the wealth of companies is held in the hands of so very few people that the impact of companies on society is kind of negligible in certain cases. And is this what you're getting at?
Absolutely. So this is because corporations are being successful in what they're trying to do. So the legal objectives of a corporation is to enrich the shareholders. They have to maximize shareholder wealth in the short term. And this is the kind of the revolutionary difference in an employee ownership company. Instead of being run to enrich the few off the work of the many, it's been run to the benefit of the many. And beyond the benefit, also employees have say in how the work is done. So what you're doing is, normally when a company is sold, when the founder sells to an outside body, the decision-making powers go further away from the work and further away from the customer. When you sell into your people, what you're doing is you're giving decision-making responsibilities to people who are intimate with the nuts and bolts of the work. They're up close and personal with the customer. So I believe that this makes for better decisions, better work, and stronger businesses going forward.
So tell me now, I know the UK has been spearheading this, but other countries are adopting it too. Tell me, how does it actually work? Give me an example of your average company. It doesn't have to be some highfalutin big company. Your average company, like your own company, Wolfgang Digital. How does it all work?
How does it work? So how do we democratize capitalism? Power to the people.
Yeah.
How do we give them a say and how do we give them a share?
Yeah.
So the employee ownership trust model is becoming very popular across the world because it's the simplest employee ownership. There's a number of employee ownership models, but this is the simplest one for a business to transition to. It's the simplest one to administer, and the employees don't have to put their hands in their pockets to buy the business. So the employee ownership trust model is one that's becoming very popular. So the way it works is the board of directors are still responsible for the strategy of the company and the day-to-day running of the company. But now you have a new body. So a trust is formed. All the employees of the company, in our case, those who were with us more than 12 months, are now members of the trust.
Okay.
They hold elections, and through the elections, they elect their colleagues into leadership positions within the trust.
Okay.
So the trust can then execute voice. It can influence the directors. It can speak to directors about how they believe we should strengthen the business. So for example, we just had our first employee voice activity. Okay. So we called it Wolves Den. It was like Dragon's Den, except people were pitching ideas as to how do they strengthen the business. So we put everybody into groups of 5 and we said, come to us with your top 3 ideas. What would you do to strengthen the business? We gave them an innovation budget. It was €88,000. We took it from profits last year. So we'd money to back, just like Dragon's Den, we'd money to back their ideas. It was fancy dress, business owner attire. So people dressed up as 1980s Gordon Gekko and the whole digital nomad gamut. So it was great crack.
John loves that sort of carry on. He's got some lovely, very, very extended shoulder pads on his suits. A la 1980s.
The bigger the better.
The bigger the better.
So it was a fun day in the office. People put a lot of thought into it and they came in with each group with their 3 ideas how they'd strengthen the business. From our perspective, we were hoping we get 1 to 3 ideas that were like, that's a winner. Let's get behind that. It went really, really well. We've 4 ideas we can't not do now that we've heard them. And these are all ideas. They're not ideas about employee benefit. So a lot of business owners might be familiar with this is when people have their employee hat on and you do employee feedback, at the center of that relationship is pay and benefit, right? So you will get a lot of feedback around pay and benefit, which the way I see that is it's people saying, oh, can I have a bigger slice of the cake? We had very, almost minimal conversations around benefit. It was all about how do we strengthen the business? It was all, I have an idea as to how we can bake a bigger cake. And so good were these ideas that, instead of just doing 1 to 3 of them, we feel there's 4 of them that we absolutely have to do. Another big benefit to us of this is as directors. So the directors of the company all started when there was 6 people and there's 70 of us now. So we used to all be very intimate with the work and we were, if not doing it, we were 1 person removed. The company's gotten to a size now where we're 2 or 3 people or 4 people removed from the actual work and from the customer. So our visibility on what we're making decisions about is getting more opaque all the time. So in doing this exercise, we got a brilliant picture into the nuts and bolts of the work, the experience of the customer. And it gave us really, not just with the decisions, the ideas they came to us with, we're now enriched with a much better picture of how the company is operating.
Can you just tell me exactly what Wolfgang Digital does? Just what are you selling?
We're a digital marketing agency.
Right.
So our story is 18 years ago when I was a young man with a full head of black hair. I went for a job in Google, didn't get it. But I fell in love with it as I felt at that time, this is the best advertising the world's ever seen. So I started spamming all the big advertisers in the golden pages, telling them golden pages is dead. There's this thing called Google. It's going to be the future of your business. We've been riding the coattails of Google's success all that time. It's been a fun journey for me from being rejected, not getting the job. They've named us their number 1 agency in EMEA 3 times now. So
that's brilliant. That is brilliant. So what you're doing is you're turning workers into owners and you're shifting mindsets from a worker mindset to a sort of an entrepreneurial mindset.
Exactly. So that's, David, you've nailed it. So for me, the reason we did this, so we've a big tax bill. We're the first people to do it because you'd be mad to do it. And we'll pay multi-million euro in tax that we wouldn't otherwise. But our big bet is that a business populated by people thinking like business owners will outperform a business populated by people thinking like employees every day of the week.
Let's explore that idea because I think it's a fascinating idea. So tease it out a bit more for me.
So have you heard the parable of St. Paul's Cathedral?
No, but I'm about to.
You're about to, okay. So 17th century, St. Paul's Cathedral in London was burnt to the ground. And the leading architect of the time, Sir Christopher Wren, was asked to rebuild it. So Sir Christopher was on site one morning and he saw two bricklayers going about their work, and they were doing dramatically different standards of work. One of them, it was sloppy, it was asymmetrical, his workspace was a mess. The other guy had made much more progress, it was aesthetic, his workplace was in good order, and he was doing his job with gusto. So Sir Christopher was really curious, what's going on here? So he went over and he tapped the first fellow on the shoulder and he says, "Who are you and what are you doing?" And the fellow goes, "Oh, well, I'm a bricklayer. I pile these bricks on top of each other and I make enough money to go home and feed my family." He goes, "Oh, interesting." And he taps the second fellow on the shoulder. "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm a cathedral builder. I'm building this monument in honor of God Almighty." And the way the story goes is our cathedral builder goes on to progress through the ranks and take on more responsibility. Yeah. So I love this story. I think it illustrates the difference between the employee mindset and the business owner mindset. You see the picture, your heart's in it. For the employee, it's a pay. I'm here for pay. But for the cathedral builder, the business owner, there's something bigger. Their heart's engaged and they're working towards a bigger picture. So you might say, all right, Alan, parables are an interesting basis for a business decision, and maybe not in the 21st century. So parables are how we used to communicate universal truths. These days we use research. Okay. So also coming from the UK, we've just had the biggest ever study in employee-owned businesses. And they found that in the UK, employee-owned businesses are 8 to 12% more productive than non-employee-owned business. Now, if you compound that year on year on year, it only takes 8 years for the phenomenal employee-owned business to be doubly as productive as the non-employee-owned business. So I love that. I think there's pent-up potential sitting in every workforce, in every company in the world, And if you can change the mindset of the people from employee to thinking like a co-owner, I think you can unlock that pent-up potential and you can unleash growth for the business.
So let's look, okay, because I couldn't agree with you more. I think we've all worked in places where the dramatic difference between the performance of individuals at the same pay grade, at the same, whatever it happens to be, is phenomenal, right? It's something about mindset, something about how you go about your own work. Now, tell me, so explain the incentive structure for the employee to begin to think like a business owner. What is the link?
What's the link? So what happens now in Wolfgang is a portion of our profits are paid out as a profit share to employees. It's paid out as a percentage uplift on their basic salary. So my hope was we'd get it to 8% in year one, because at 8%, you work 12 months, but you get paid 13. So I felt like there's a feeling of skin in the game. You're really feeling a commercial reward there. We've actually done better than that. And we pay it quarterly, and we've had 3 quarters, and it's averaged to 10%. So some teams are slightly higher based on their team's commercial performance. Some teams are slightly lower. But on average, people in Wolfgang are getting a 10% basic salary uplift in the form of a profit share.
Wow. Right. And that is the incentive. Now, explain to me, and this is what I want to talk to you about, the psychology of this. Have conversations changed in the organization?
Yeah, so I feel, so we're early doors, we're 10 months in now. But when I think of the Wolves Den employee voice activity we did, so we've been doing employee voice activities throughout the years. And you'd often get a large portion of the feedback was something around, can I have a bigger slice of the cake? Pension, health insurance.
Pay me more. Pay me more.
Way of working. And they're an employee. That's how they think. Of course, that's the conversation. So it was really remarkable. They all understand now that if we bake a bigger cake, everybody wins. So none of the suggestions were, I want a bigger slice of the cake. All the 21 suggestions we got were, I have an idea as to how we can bake a bigger cake. I have an idea how we can use AI to give our customers a better experience. I have an idea how we can use mentoring to bridge the gap between the senior people and the junior people that's causing us. Like we could, as directors, say, here's what's keeping us up at night. I'll give you an example. So one of the issues we have is that everybody who joined Wolfgang when we were remote for 2 years during COVID has subsequently left. I think we hired 20 people and 1 person stayed. So remote working didn't suit us. So half the company is with us more than 5 years. Half the company is with us less than 3 years. So you can imagine all sorts of operational issues kind of come from that space. And they were so articulate, the team, that, they showed us the stats they'd seen. They could show us their view on the business problems. And they said mentoring fills the gap. They said, if we can train up the top half to form relationships with the bottom half, then its culture, relationships, way of working is now flowing around the organization much more fluidly. And the minute we heard it, we're like, oh, we never considered that, that's golden. And that's business owner
Yeah.
thinking. They're solving our problems.
Alan, can I ask you, obviously this creates more competition within the company and between employees. Does that give rise to a bit more conflict or
Interesting
more
question.
collaboration?
Collaboration. Yeah. So are you saying from the sense of the profit share? Is that where there might be more?
There's always office politics. How does office politics play out?
I think when you have the employee hat on and you're thinking about your next promotion, and your next pay rise, I think that's where office politics come from. So we have a vision, for what we want the company to be. We have a 3-year version of that. We've what we expect to be in 3 years. In the legal constitution of both the company and the trust, we have the same vision and values, and we have the same objectives. So everybody's now aligned around the same destination, the same way of getting there.
Right.
And I feel like we're cooperating and collaborating much more strongly as a result. Like, to dramatically oversimplify that book, Sapiens, if I was to give you that huge tome of a book in a sentence, Yuval says that human superpower is we can gather around a shared idea.
Yes,
That's
and I
it.
think he's right. It's the idea of collaboration at scale makes humans different to other animals. And yeah, you're right. I think that's one of the big points in the book. I want to come back to the ideas. How do you think corporations have evolved into being nothing less in many scales as a looting opportunity from the very top?
Yeah, absolutely. So the corporation is a child of colonialism, David. So the corporation, just like employee ownership is an innovation in ownership, back in the early 1600s in the Netherlands, the corporation was an innovation in ownership. It was a way for people to fund colonial expeditions. So that's how it started. It funded in the Dutch East India Company. I'm not going to try the Dutch word. It's the VOC.
Yeah, the VOC.
They wanted to be able to fund...
By the way, the biggest corporation ever in history.
Oh, really?
Far bigger than Apple was at its peak about 2 years ago.
Wow. So there you have it.
And you're absolutely right. So what they had to do is they had to basically underwrite the risk of putting ships from Amsterdam all the way around to Borneo. And they had to figure out, okay, how do you do this? How do you share the risks? How do you also share the liability? This is where legal liability comes in, unlimited liability, limited liability, all these sort of innovations. So what you're saying, it starts with the Dutch, but it's a colonial project. That's fascinating. So let's explore that a
Absolutely.
little bit more.
So the world's very first corporations, set off marauding the world, looking to extract value from anywhere they landed. And if you look at the multinational corporation of today, the private equity firm of today, they're doing exactly the same thing 400 years later. So they're marauding the world, seeking to enrich the few, from the work and the resources of the many. And society's moved on. So, when it comes to countries, when we speak about gathering around a shared idea, and one of the most successful shared ideas for countries has been democracy. Democracy works. We're on some unstable footing in some places right now, but if you look over the last few centuries, it's created huge prosperity and much fairer societies. So take the G20, 20 biggest economies in the world, 17 of them are democracies. In terms of fairness, I think the most emphatic evidence is migration. People are risking their own lives and the lives of their children to move from non-democratic countries to build a better life in a democratic country. So democracy works. Prosperity, fairness. Everybody wants to live in a democracy. But the strange thing is we might be living in democracies, but we're still working in something that looks more like a dictatorship. So we're working in a corporation, which is to enrich the few off the work of the many. The people at the top are unaccountable to the many. And people, they don't really have, there might be employee feedback, but, it doesn't really matter. A corporation, it might have a mission statement. It might have corporate values. It might have corporate social responsibility. But if the profit gets threatened, everything and everyone is on the chopping block.
Yes, but we're noticing that right now.
Exactly. So here in Dublin, we've multinationals with layoffs. So these aren't multinationals that have gone from profit to loss. They're not even multinationals that profit this year is less than it was last year. They're simply so sensitive to profit that when the growth in profit slows down, it's layoffs. So they're still making record profits, but they need to cut jobs. So, in the spirit, the countries we live in, the spirit of democracy, been run the best interest of everything. This is really jarring. If that was a country, we'd call that a dictatorship.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's funny, having worked in large corporations, I always felt that I was moving from a capitalist world in my day-to-day life. But when I put on the suit and went in, I always thought I was kind of joining like a communist party thing, that there was apparatchiks, there was politics, there was, I really did. I worked in very large international banks. And I remember thinking for myself, this doesn't really feel like a capitalist endeavor. What it feels like is you're a cog. You were you were almost like joining an army. You were a cog in a machine. You went in, you did your work. There was all sorts of Chinese walls and Chinese windows and politics and reverence to the big boss. And, some big boss was a total tosser and you had to be aware of that, all that sort of stuff. And suddenly you yourself, I always thought that if your personality changes when you go to work, this is an incredibly bad sign. And I felt that, I'm sure lots of people listening feel that their personality changes. They're a different person in work. And the reason there is a different person in work is that the rules that are applied in a large corporation, they change you. You begin to try to second guess people. You begin to try and play politics, even though you don't want to. And frankly, you yourself can become, not always, but can become a diminished creature within the. Well, some people love it and some people work and they like the lack of risk and they like the security, and I get all that sort of stuff. But I do think that when I look at people's personalities and I see the change when they put on the suit or when they go in the door, then there's something lacking. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the personality back into the gig.
Exactly. So exactly what you described, David. So they didn't get the best of David McWilliams. David McWilliams has worked in a lot of companies that got, I don't know, maybe a 6.5 out of 10 David McWilliams, when there's so much more to give because you didn't feel like you fit. When the organization itself is a sociopath, by definition, by the legal objectives of the company, the organization is a sociopath. Then you go in there every day and you put on your mask and you might start behaving a little bit sociopathically yourself because that's what's rewarded.
I think you're absolutely right. You play the game, the rules of which are set by somebody else. And those rules, like all humans, we adapt. We're an adaptive creature. So you adapt. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think lots and lots of people listening will feel that, but instinctively, the jump between being in the corporation and being able to pay your mortgage and be able to pay your bills and all that sort of, to the risk that you're going to actually be on your Sweeney Todd out in the big bad world trying to make a crust is too great for many people. And in a way, this employee ownership trust actually gives those people a way out. It's like an exit strategy without the massive risk. Like you're not jumping off the cliff in a sense.
Yeah, you get to be yourself in work. You get to have a say how the work is done. You get to voice in how the business is run. When things are going well, you're 12 weeks away from a bonus. When things aren't going well, you're empowered to help your team do better. So the work becomes much more a reflection of the people working there. So for us, I referenced this earlier, but as the directors of the company, we acknowledge we're always getting further away from the work. And every time the company grows 10%, I feel we're 10% less qualified to be making decisions based on what's happening at the grassroots level. So we really want to empower the people down there to be helping us do better work and be themselves, bring themselves to work.
It's very interesting, Alan. You're talking about this idea of proximity to the problem. This was the actual nub of Friedrich Hayek's economics, right? And he wrote a book called The Road to Serfdom, right? And this is a very, very popular book, particularly amongst the more right wing, but I think it's been co-opted by the right wing in a sense. But what he was trying to say was that idea is that information is always best. If you want to understand what's going on in the bricklayer's world, talk to the bricklayer. Don't talk to somebody 5 or 6 iterations above that person. And he was making the point that what makes economies efficient is information, is knowledge. And knowledge is always going to be residing in the head of the person who's closest to the problem, which is exactly what you guys are doing. And as a consequence of that, I think you probably eliminate a lot of the office politics, because office politics is also a function of information. If you knew what I knew, that you're the top man, like you even see it in the court of Trump now, like, right? All the acolytes, they're saying, they're trying to second guess what the geezer's thinking, right? And why is that? Because the information isn't transparent. And the way in which office politics plays, it's really about people's access to information, and they bully other people who don't have access to that information. And that is actually where you get the stripes or where you don't get the stripes. So what you're saying is this thing can actually help you diminish all that stuff and allow people to do their own thing.
And what you just mentioned there about knowledge, so we're kind of, if we take a longer view of the world of work, it's never been more knowledge-based than it is now. So, and that's why the time is now for employee ownership. So once upon a time, most jobs are agricultural. Land was the primary factor of production. So the landowner was the owner. That's why we have the House of Lords in the UK and something similar in France. Then the world of work changed to factory. We were producing goods, and the person who owned the capital, was the most important person. So they became the owner in production. Now we've moved from manufacturing to service, and in particularly in service to the knowledge economy. And in the knowledge economy, the most important factor in production is the people. It's the labor. So it kind of follows that ownership should flow towards the people in the knowledge economy. If you look at the most advanced technological companies in the world, they've all been pioneering their own version of employee ownership. So the employee,
with share options and things like that.
So we've in Silicon Valley, you have the receptionist who's a millionaire. So they confer the rewards of ownership, but none of the responsibility. They want to keep the power, but they're happy to share some of the commercial rewards. So even at that, the world's most advanced technological companies are already, who are, kind of more dictatorships than democracies, but they still are embracing their version of employee ownership.
Yeah, no. I would have fancied that gig in Google about 20 years ago. I wouldn't be doing podcasting for a living now. I'd be sitting on our hooves up doing something else. Now, look, one last thing I want to talk to you about is the legal structure in Ireland, right?
Yeah.
Because we're a society that is adapting to the world at a very, very rapid pace. Is this easy to do in Ireland? Is it easy for a company to set up an employee ownership trust? Because when I'm looking at all the multinationals over time, we need to find a different economic model, which is not as dependent on the whims of people in Silicon Valley, for example, or our politicians, our tariffs, or all this sort of stuff that we've got no control over. And this seems to me to be, a building block that could help the society, and it could help the economy, and it could help the industrial base, all that sort of stuff. Where are we in Ireland with the legalities of being able to do this?
So from a legal perspective, you can set up a talent trust, an employee ownership trust. Ours is called the Wolfgang Talent Trust. So that's okay. It's from the tax perspective that it's quite punitive.
Explain that to me.
So the tax system doesn't understand what you're doing when you sell into your people rather than sell out to a big corporation. So it hits you with the biggest taxes it possibly can. So our company was valued at 10 million. If we'd sold out to private equity or to a corporation, you would have paid capital gains tax. We would have paid 3 million. Because we're selling in, the tax system doesn't recognize it. We have to pay income tax on that. So we have to pay 5 million. So we're going to pay 2 million more in the deal than we would otherwise. The company, when I die in the future, hopefully in the far future, will then have an inheritance tax levied on it. So every year it'll have to pay an inheritance tax. So we've put our hand up for a big tax bill. We're such believers in the idea. We believe we'll outgrow it. But at the moment, you'd be daft to do it, or very optimistic that you can outgrow the tax.
So what you're saying is that our capital gains tax in Ireland is 30-odd%. Our marginal rate of income tax at that level is 52%. As long as this is not treated as capital gains, and as long as it's treated as income, it's not going to be very attractive for directors of companies to go down that route, because they're just going to pay more tax.
They're going to pay,
right? And so it's a decision that is crystallized at the point of sale.
Yeah, exactly. So you'd be going into the professional advice I got was, don't do this. You'd be mad. You're going to pay a lot more tax. Nobody pays more tax. It's sent more than they need to. But
I'm yet to meet somebody who willingly pays more tax. That's very true.
So in the UK, Canada, Australia, Denmark, they've all recently legislated for this. The government's recognised this is a really good thing. We need to do it. Department of Finance commissioned report last year recommended Irish government look at what the UK have done around EOTs and do it too. There's a couple of reasons why the government really need to look at it. So, I know a great quote of yours, David, is demographics is destiny. The baby boomer generation, they're retiring. The business owners among them need a home for their company. There's a lot of successful companies that risk going derelict because they just don't have a succession option. So that's the reason why governments love it. Also, in Ireland, we desperately need to build a domestic economy. It is an economic miracle that we've gone from being the poorest country in Western Europe in our lifetimes to one of the wealthiest. And it's because the government did brilliant work attracting multinationals. It made Ireland a great place to be a multinational. And that's been phenomenal. But we're now past peak multinational by the looks of things, and we need to develop the domestic economy. I believe if we give Irish business owners the opportunity to sell in rather than sell out, they'll do it. And those companies will be stronger for it and will build a domestic economy. Big problem Ireland has is we're losing our best companies at a rate of 3 a week. So every week, 3 Irish companies are sold into foreign ownership. And they're the best of our companies. The private equity, they're not buying the duds. So now is the time, for demographic reasons such as the baby boomers. Also, for the first time in the history of the Irish labour market, there's less people coming up, behind
That's
the
very
Pope's
true.
children.
That's very true. Yeah.
Our
that's very
population
true.
is shrinking. So in the history of the Irish labour force, it's always been the situation that for every person in a job, there's 2 people coming up, they'll do it for cheaper. That's reversed. For everybody under 40, there's now less people, and you might end up paying more to hire a less experienced person. So a business owner really has to give people an emphatic reason to come and work with them. And I think
Yeah.
from an economic perspective, ownership is the most emphatic. And the third reason, David, is the future of work. We can all see artificial intelligence is coming, okay? And the way of working is going to change quite dramatically. And the big question is, who owns the AI? So if a corporation owns the AI and a corporation wants to maximize profit or wants to cut costs, a corporation sees its people as a cost to be cut. So if a corporation can use AI to cut people, it will do that. And that's not good for working people or society. An employee-owned company is legally bound to be running to the benefit of employees. Employees are interested in good quality work. So they will use AI to increase productivity, increase performance. So as we move into an AI world, jobs are much safer, for the people who are working in the employee-owned companies than they would be in the corporations.
Fascinating point. Listen, Alan, where do listeners find out more about this? Because I find it really intuitive. In other words, some ideas are intuitive, and an idea that makes intuitive sense is a golden idea. And usually the problem with ideas is they're not immediately intuitive. This one is. Where do people find out more about this?
Yeah, so if there's any digital marketers listening, David, and they want to own where they work, we'll be hiring 15 digital marketers, and from graduate right up to senior this year. So they can go to wolfgangdigital.com/careers. The Employee Ownership Association of the UK is probably the leading source of information on this thing. We're doing their courses, we're going to their conferences. They're the world leaders in this space. So people want to learn more.
To come back to Google, just Google it.
Just Google it. I ChatGPT it, but yeah, you could Google it too.
Listen, Al, wonderful stuff. I find it really fascinating. And we're going to keep our eye on this because I think it is a revolutionary idea that is also makes complete sense and it's very doable. And it seems that its time has come.
Magic. Thanks so much, John and David.
Yeah, geez, I love the sound of this. It just seems to make an awful lot of sense, both for employer and employee. It's like a win-win for everyone.
Yes.
It's all about growth and resilience for the company and hopefully the future of work.
Yeah.
But I suppose it remains to be seen if revenue and if politicians can get behind it and make a real change.
Yeah, I mean, I love all that stuff. And Alan really kind of set the whole thing out, I think, logically, intelligently, and more importantly, I think, John, in fairness, convincingly.
Yeah.
So, basically you give people skin in the game and they thrive. So listen, we're going to leave this now, but I suppose one of the takeaways is if you are a digital marketer and you're looking to own where you work, Wolfgang is now hiring. They're looking for 15 digital marketers this year, from graduates to senior experts. Join the employee ownership revolution and find out more at wolfgangdigital.com/careers. That's wolfgangdigital.com/careers. And we'll talk to you next week.